You're listening to the Inside Podcast Network, podcasts for the enterprise. Hello and welcome to another episode of Inside the Microsoft Cloud. Hang on a sec. Trying something a little different today, so anyway, I won't bore you with the details. This is episode, I'm going to go with episode 5, given that we did a couple while Pete and Lee were at Ignite. But let's welcome back the man of the hour, Mr. Pete Zerger. Hey, Pete.
Hey, Dan. How are things down under?
Actually, you know what? Not too bad. Not too bad. Winter's kicking in, but that's okay. It was a mild morning. How about for your good self?
Well, yeah, that's the upside of the Northern Hemisphere. We're just about to summertime. Although summertime in Houston isn't typically great news. We're reaching those temperatures where it goes just beyond hot to inappropriate. So,
and it's generally a sort of wet, sticky heat, right? It's not dry.
It is. It's generally just not the most comfortable. Today I ran what I call a Texas 5K. It's where you get out there and start running, and it's so hot you turn back half a mile early.
Fair enough. So have you been busy? You in your new role with Cyrus, although it's not so much new these days, but I know you've been gallivanting around the States and Europe for the last few months. How things settled down?
They never really settle down. It's just the pace, the activity that drives the pace is, and no pun intended, the team I work with is the partner and community enablement, or PACE team. The pace is always fast. What we're doing changes. Frankly, those trips where I'm gallivanting, that's a very easy job for me. That's spreading the good word, teaching people about System Center and Cyrus. When I get back here to my office and I'm working from home, that's where the real heavy lifting begins. That's when there are content and other development activities. So, and lots of developing, lots of talking, lots of presenting all the time.
Oh well, makes for a busy life, I guess.
It makes for what feels like not actually working for a living, so I'll take it.
Of course you will. Now, I'm not even going to bother to try and articulate today's particular podcast because there were just too many words that you gave me, and I didn't write them down. So why don't you tell everyone at home, listening or watching?
So in light of Dan's confession, I will tell everyone. So
Please.
Today we have something special planned for you. We're going to give you a roadmap. I think survival guide is more of is the more appropriate term for the next generation Azure IaaS that was revealed at Build, that was reiterated, if you will, at the Ignite conference in Chicago. So I really want to talk you through some basics of what that means, why it's so cool, and what you need in terms of resources and tools, and really what you need to accept to be successful.
Yep.
With the next generation of Azure.
Okay. I'm glad I didn't do the introduction. I'm glad it was you.
Yeah, it really wasn't succinct, was it? So let's call this your Azure IaaS V2 roadmap.
Oh, nice one. There we go. We have a name for the episode. Azure IaaS V2 roadmap. I better write that down somewhere. Now, a word of warning from the top, I guess, for those that are sitting in their car on a Monday morning, stuck in gridlock on their way to work. There is going to be some video associated with this. Pete is going to be running through some high-level demos, would you call them, Pete?
Yeah, there'll be some high level demos, and I think you'll get my point because I'm going to narrate those carefully. I'm going to be cognizant of the fact that some of you are possibly only listening, so I don't think you'll have to see them to appreciate. But we will throw you a couple of curves. So for IT pros, this is the brave new world, and I'm going to say a couple of things in this episode that I think will surprise.
Okay.
But it will pass. There was a time where Azure, being the future, surprised.
Yep.
And I think we're past that.
That we are. So for those that are listening along at home, I would encourage you to jump on over to youtube.com/user/Inside Podcast Network. Or why are you laughing?
that URL. So speaking of not succinct.
Oh, come on. All right. I'll set something up. Yeah, okay.
We'll try to put a bit.ly. We'll take some URL shortener to that and see what we can make happen.
In fact, you know what? For those of you listening along at home, go to ipn.tv/ICM5. That is IMC5, inside the Microsoft Cloud episode 5. And there will be a great big dirty fat YouTube video right there at the top that you can sit down and skip past the bits where I'm in it and perhaps just kick back, relax, enjoy the sweet dulcet tones of Mr. Pete Zerger. And he's easy on the eyes as well, folks, which is good.
We have descended into nonsense. But,
we have.
But off we go. So start us off, Dan.
All right. Well, where do we start? I mean, do you want to run through a comparison between what's there now and what's expected to be coming in V2?
Yeah, we can do that. So one of the things I should start by saying is you're only going to see your V2 assets in the Azure Preview portal.
Right.
So what's the difference there? Well, when you're at manage.windowsazure.com, you're looking at the current portal.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to portal.azure.com, you're looking at the preview portal. I have, in the process of working with Azure, next gen networking here, which is out there for you to play with, and I'll make sure you have a nice roadmap, the tools, the resources at your avail. I've gotten to where I prefer the V2 portal substantially. It will be easier to work with the V2 resources once all of the community and the documentation and everything and the tools, frankly, catch up and are full release.
Yep.
But I think there are a lot of reasons why we're all going to be happier with the V2. The next gen IaaS as well, and we're going to prefer that over what we have today.
Right.
So what's different? So number one, I don't think you really need that visual, but there you have it.
For those listening, Pete put one finger up.
So you have to use the next gen portal if you're going to view those resources through the portal. The next little bit to understand is in the Azure commandlets, and if you're listening to us in the month of June, so today is June 10th, 9th, 10th, 11th.
Well, you're so far off. It's the 13th where I am, so it's going to be the 12th for you.
Holy cow! Okay,
yeah.
So that's how much the date matters to me in my average day. Outlook tells me what to do. The calendar prompts me. Appear here now.
Yeah, there we go.
So that being said, you'll need to download the Azure SDK 2.6. You're going to get basically the latest Azure PowerShell bits is what it boils down to.
Yep.
And when you're working with Azure vNext components, you're going to use the switch -Azure mode commandlet to switch over to Azure Resource Manager mode. So you're not working in what we would know as the service management mode, which is where all of our V1 action happens today.
Right.
So I'm not going to. I don't want to dig into how that module might change in the future, but suffice it to say, if we're going to be working in Resource Manager more often, no doubt the PowerShell module will continue to evolve just like it does on a regular cadence. So what else is interesting about V2? And I'm going to build to the big stuff at the end. So the biggest advance is going to be around deployment, which is where we're going to spend most of our time.
Yep.
So one of the things that we have in V1 that we do not have in V2, and if you listen to our ad hoc episodes from Ignite, I had an interview with Corey Sanders, and I talked to him about this change, which is massively for the better, and that is when you deploy a virtual machine in Azure IaaS, next gen there in the preview portal, that virtual machine is not wrapped in a cloud service. So that cloud service to me always felt like an odd and sometimes unnecessary construct. Certainly if I was deploying a single virtual machine, I felt like it was silly that we had to have that cloud service wrapped around it. So where that cloud service is most irritating is if you're an automation guy. So there are a lot of things we might label ourselves as. I think it's fair to call myself an automation guy after all these years. But deploying virtual machines into Azure IaaS, present day, when I tried to deploy that second machine into that cloud service, I can't do it until the first virtual machine is deployed because it has an exclusive lock. That change has an exclusive lock on the cloud service. So that is, a big negative to parallelism and minimizing deployment time. Plus, it's just generally kind of aggravating when you push some buttons and try to make something happen. And all I'm doing is deploying this single virtual machine onto, perhaps the most powerful cloud fabric on the planet, and it's telling me you can only deploy one at a time. So we see that evaporate. What you get in terms of a new construct in IaaS v2 is what we call a resource group. So a resource group will be how we will group elements for an application. We might deploy all of the components. Let's say we're taking System Center to the cloud. I might deploy all of my System Center Ops Manager components to a single resource group. I can tag at that resource group level, which gives me some capability to assign things like ownership,
right,
or project, or at the end that's going to take me back to some billing capability. At the end of the day, that resource group becomes the new logical construct. Tagging is something everybody's been complaining about because that other public cloud platform, the other A word, we'll call it, they've had tagging for a long, long time.
Right.
So now we've got something in terms of tagging like we have on like Amazon's had for a while.
Mm-hmm. You said it.
So
that's all right. Keep going.
Yeah, I did. It's
all right. We
keeping it real.
Yeah.
So what else? So when we look at components like load balancers, for example, in Azure IaaS today, your internal load balancer and your internet-facing load balancer are two different logical constructs. The internal load balancer was something that came along later on. So now you'll find in Azure IaaS, next gen in this V2, as I'm calling it, that there is a single logical construct for load balancers, just like there should be. So a load balancer is a load balancer, and I can assign it a public IP address so it's publicly accessible.
Yep.
I can establish inbound and outbound NAT rules. If I don't want to put a public endpoint on there, I don't have to.
Right.
I establish probes. I establish affinity. If I'm going to be layer 3, layer 4. Mm-hmm. If I'm doing this, by IP address at the session, etc. So I think for me now, the load balancer makes sense. Yep. It's very logical, and if you don't fully appreciate how a load balancer goes together, because what I will say is today you're not going to find an abundance of pictorials and documentation of that nature. I was actually drawing a Visio of the logical components of a load balancer today, actually to send some suggestions or questions to somebody at Microsoft. But if you want to understand a load balancer, as we talk about that deployment capability, I'll point you to some examples, and the best way to look at a load balancer and understand what components are there is to just deploy one. And the UI in V2, in the preview portal, gives you a nice visual on what a load balancer is all about. And the first time I told myself I'm not quite sure what that new load balancer is all about, I deployed it and went and looked in the portal, and I was very pleasantly surprised that, hey, this makes perfect sense.
Right.
It feels like a hardware load balancer in software form. It's got all of the same sort of constructs. So,
yep.
Availability sets still exist. Affinity groups, we've all been warned, are going away for a long time, and they are appropriately absent. Affinity groups disappeared, by and large, because there was a time where, in order to ensure best performance, even when you deployed virtual machines in a single data center, you would use an affinity group to tell Azure, I want you to put these very close together. And you would use an availability set to say, but not too close together. So the affinity group would keep them very close so as to be, on a similar network segment. Availability set would ensure they were in different fault domains. So think placing virtual machines in different racks is really what an availability set's all about, if you're not familiar. Which means that when Microsoft patches their fabric, which they have to do and they do warn you about, they're not going to take your application down because you have an availability set established for those VMs that keep them separate.
Right.
So those are some of the big differences that come to mind. But I remember when talking to Corey Sanders, we blamed Corey for that lock that happens with the cloud service.
Yep.
And he said, you know what? Sure, my fault. I created it, but now I fixed it. So I don't think Corey created it, but perhaps he was one of those key folks responsible for this vNext architecture that fixed it. So
sure.
At build, and so those are some basic differences. All right, so those are small positive differences by and large.
Yep.
I will say that when we work our way into Azure automation and we start working with the PowerShell components, there are some challenges that we're finding with PowerShell. I'm not going to dwell on those too much because by the time most people get into mainstream working with this, those challenges I believe will be resolved. It's some challenges I'm having there around resource manager, which isn't loaded in the resource manager module.
Yep.
For Azure PowerShell is not loaded in Azure Automation by default, and Azure PowerShell doesn't launch in resource manager mode by default. It launches in service management.
Yep.
So there's some annoyance there that's fixable right now by using paths, but that's going to get sorted.
They're just teething issues, right?
Yeah. And through the normal community channels, user voice, etc., we've all sort of expressed what we think should be done there, and so they'll get it sorted like they always do. That's what preview is all about, is ID the problems and fix it.
Yep.
So that's all fine. Those are logical changes that I think are by and large positive.
Yep.
So what's the big change? The big change comes in the form of Azure Resource Manager templates. So this is the new deployment capability, and these Azure Resource Manager templates are the same. It's the same template language that we talk about with Azure Stack, which is that on-prem equivalent.
Yep.
That was announced. Microsoft said we're going to have same bits, true single deployment capability. So this is going to be pretty fantastic that we should be able to define a deployment template for Azure and reuse it in Azure Stack.
Yep.
So this makes, this sort of embodies what one might have imagined when back a year and change ago when we said Windows Azure and Windows Azure Stack, back when we were still calling it Windows Azure Pack.
Yep.
Because one would imagine that Windows Azure Pack would mimic Azure, right?
Yep.
And in the end, it basically mimics the Azure UI. And I'm not, for you WAP fans, I'm not trying to take anything away from WAP. I'm just saying, it didn't really mimic Azure deployment under the hood in any meaningful way.
Correct.
So anyway, the massive change here is this deployment capability, this new deployment methodology. So now we have a template-based deployment where I can define what I would like to deploy in terms of a resource group, a storage account, virtual machines, load balancer, availability set. There's native support for deploying PowerShell desired state configuration to run PowerShell DSE modules within the virtual machine after it's deployed.
Right.
Which tells you right away I can define dependencies. I can define in this template that this script requires this virtual machine to be online. This virtual machine requires Active Directory, this Active Directory VM to be available before we try to join the domain. So I can define dependencies several layers deep. I can actually create nested deployments where I call one template from another. Great example of this would be simply deploying a new Active Directory forest from a template.
Yep.
At some point, I'm going to have to change my DNS from Azure DNS to Active Directory DNS. You can do that by calling another template.
Yep.
So what we're moving from is current state Azure IaaS is an imperative deployment model. So we have some challenges there, and we have to code to make sure things happen in a particular order. With Azure IaaS v2, we have a declarative deployment model. So our capability to define ahead of time in what order events are going to happen is much greater. And what order events are going to happen without writing a whole bunch of PowerShell around that to be very clear.
Yep.
The other magic word, and I hate this word.
Go on.
Idempotent.
Ooh.
So idempotence means that when an action is applied twice to any value, it gives the same result as if it were applied once. So why do you care? You care because if something fails, it means you can apply that template again.
Yep.
And it will overlay and apply the elements that are not true. So it kind of gives you that resume or do-over type capability.
Yep.
Now, I want to draw some boundaries there. So that sounds something akin to magic, and you think, well, geez, I can't screw it up. Totally, you can. I've done that. I say that not just theoretically. I've done that.
Pete's done the hard work for us, folks. He's already screwed up, and he's going to tell us how not to. No.
Been there, done that. I've been there, done that. Put it to bed. Called it an Uber. For example, so what can't this idempotent process protect against? Well, so one of the elements that we can apply, I mentioned we can apply PowerShell desired state, which has that same quality, by the way, of idempotence. However, I can also call plain old PowerShell scripts, and what's fantastic about that is those plain old PowerShell scripts will run within the VM after the VM is deployed if I define it as such in the template. So in current state Azure IaaS, what I would typically do is lay out a nice XML document that defined the environment. So it felt a bit like a template, but typically I was using a lot of PowerShell remoting. So that's only as reliable as your connectivity. So if as long as I was deploying from a VM within Azure, we're all good. But what if I'm deploying from Melbourne, Australia, the land of less than optimal bandwidth, if we're being kind.
Wow, that's harsh, man.
Yeah, I apologize. So my script at that, so in current state, if that script were to fail, my remoting connection breaks.
Yep.
I have to write the logic into my script to recover.
Right.
That sucks. I've been there and kind of tackled that as well, and pretty quickly came to where I liked to deploy from a virtual machine within Azure, because my connectivity was assured at that point. I could deploy from a VM within the same data center, and we're in good shape. So this deployment capability, the templates are not XML, they're JSON templates. So if you've done any work with Windows Azure Pack, those are JSON templates as well. So we're seeing this move from, and I don't think this is just a Microsoft thing. I think the world of DevOps, we're moving from XML to JSON. So I don't think we have to get into the finer points of JSON today. That's another half an hour on its own. But JSON is XML's more attractive cousin. To inadequately wrap a brief characterization around that.
Yeah.
So with these JSON templates, the first question comes, how do I author these things? So you're not going to do it in PowerShell ISE. You're not going to do it in a typical XML editor. So how would I do that? So I'm going to start with the free option. It's always good to start with some free options. So you could use Notepad, but you're not going to use Notepad because that's going to be terrible. Because there's no air checking or validation of your document, right? It's going to be tough. And I'm going to point you to some templates. So you're going to have a starting point where you can look at how somebody else has performed a number of actions before you. Yep. Created virtual networks, virtual machines, load balance sets of VMs. Use some of that PowerShell DSE capability I was referring to. So you're going to have an array of templates that you can look at, and we'll provide the URL for the source of those samples that you can get. Right off the internet. So between you and me, I like to use Visual Studio and Git. So and they keep all these templates out on Git. You can search them on the Microsoft website on the Azure Quick Starts templates page. I just sync the Git repo or repository. You'll hear us call it repo a lot. To be economic with our syllables, but I've got that Git repo, so I have all those samples, so I can pull those up and look at them at a glance, so I can get little JSON snippets here and there. Yep. It's something akin to borrowing from scripts, right? We all do that with one another on the internet. You post a script on the Azure the TechNet gallery, and somebody in India borrows that and he enhances it, and somebody in California borrows that. It's similar concept. Microsoft have given us a lot of samples. So what you could do is let's take Notepad++. A lot of people use Notepad++.
That they do.
It has a PowerShell add-in. It has an XML add-in. It also has a JSON add-in that you can download. And so you might ask yourself, well, why do I care? So I actually have one of these templates open. Do you mind if I just share my screen briefly?
Go for it.
So this is going to be a quick demo, and I'll talk those of you through it who are just listening. So I'm going to share, and so bear with me here, Dan. I'll
take your time.
Tell me when you see the screen, and I'm going to take a couple of steps, and then I'll do some zoom so you guys can kind of see the magic.
Yep.
So I have installed Notepad++. I've also installed this JSON add-in for Notepad++. It's as simple as downloading a zip file that contains a single DLL that you go drop in your plugins directory, and then you relaunch Notepad++. So I have opened one of those Microsoft provided samples right here. So this is a JSON deployment document. So what I don't appreciate about this fully is there's no color coding, etc. It's not XML, it's JSON. So I'm going to make this template work, I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see. I want you to pay special attention to my left-hand pane. So you'll notice that the Json Viewer on the left says, please select a JSON string.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do is select my JSON string, which is the entire document. So Control-A, just like you do in Notepad. I'm going to go to Plugins. I'm going to go to my Json Viewer, and I'm going to say Show JSON Viewer. And now it has parsed my document, and it's going to show me what is in this template. So you're going to notice here I have tidy little nodes here where it's basically, this is validating my syntax. So if you actually select that menu option and it doesn't work, it's a good sign you did something wrong. So this gives you validation for free. There's the show Json Viewer node. So within 15 minutes, you can download your one or more templates to get started with, to look at how it all comes together. You can get Notepad++, the Json Viewer add-in, and this is a start. This is not how I do it, nor do I think this is going to be the way that most IT pros are going to be the most successful.
Sure.
So I'll stop sharing for now, and we'll come back to where I think we're going to wind up in just a minute, because it's going to be a bit shocking. So I'm going to go back to something I said a few months ago in a podcast we did. We had a DevOps roundtable with a few folks, which I think was one of our more popular.
That it was.
Yeah. So I said that I like to use Visual Studio as my PowerShell editor. And there is an add-in out there called PowerShell Tools for Visual Studio. It's out in the Visual Studio gallery on the MSDN website, written by Adam Driscoll, who is an awesome developer/genius. I love what he's done there. Requires PowerShell v3. You can use it with Visual Studio 2013. You can use it with Visual Studio 2015 release candidate. So why was I espousing Visual Studio all those months ago? It's because I felt like things were headed in a direction where we were going to see more and more authoring experiences in Visual Studio. So Dan, you're a SCOM, you're a System Center Ops Manager guru. Where do you write management packs today?
Notepad. No.
Okay.
Visual Studio.
Nice.
I don't use Notepad.
So Visual Studio isn't always where we wrote them, right? Microsoft used to build us standalone tools for that function-specific capability.
Yep.
And now they made a decision some years ago and said, you know what? Rather than building a standalone tool for SCOM, we're just going to leverage Visual Studio, and we will give you the capabilities right there.
Yep.
In Visual Studio.
Like if you're developing, whether it's a management pack or a script, it makes sense to use a common interface.
Yeah, so IT pros out here, let's just think on this right now. So I know some folks get irritated when they hear that Visual Studio could be a really good path forward. When I'm done tonight, or today, if you're in Dan's hemisphere, in Dan's time zone, hemisphere doesn't really matter, does it? It's more about the time zone.
Time zone, sure. Yeah.
You will absolutely appreciate why Visual Studio is a fantastic authoring experience, the best authoring experience you're going to have for building these JSON templates yourself. So Dan, before we even, so that is to say, Visual Studio, the PowerShell Tools for Visual Studio add-in, so I can write my PowerShell scripts, my run books, my SCOM management packs, and now my JSON templates. And now I'm going to stop and I'm going to drink my coffee, and you're going to talk to us about the problem with Visual Studio, the non-technical problem.
Well, I guess the obvious non-technical problem is that Visual Studio requires an MSDN subscription, or you can purchase it outright, but it's certainly not a cheap purchase. Not that Visual Studio was ever available with TechNet, but the base level MSDN subscription that allows you to get Visual Studio is I think $5,000 or $6,000, something like that.
Is it really? My gosh.
Something like that. Look, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I mean, you and I both get MSDN through our MVP, so it's something that we're lucky enough to have that. and most businesses will have MSDN in one form or another, but for hobbyists, it's just not a viable option.
So I apologize, I'm smiling here because I knew Dan would get this right the very first time, and this is really a pretty serious topic. And so I want to say something here right now for our listeners, especially those of you that don't have a free copy of Visual Studio and are a little bit irritated by that, because I think nobody appreciates that more than us, because developing for the community should be something you don't have to spend many thousands of dollars to do, right? If you're going to contribute to the open source community, it'd be great if there were some tools that were free. I think the experience that I'm going to show you right now would be fantastic if we see that fully functional in an express version of Visual Studio, as part of the end game. Even Adam's Visual Studio add-in is for Visual Studio 2013 or 2015. It's not for Express. Yeah, so at the end of the day, it would be great to see all of these things in some free version, and I think this probably warrants a visit by someone to user voice to express an opinion there. If you're somebody who can't corporately get those tools, you don't have an MSDN subscription, etc. Sometimes this is the nature of the beast. For example, I wanted to get a copy of Xamarin, which is an add-in that enables you to develop native C# code one time and then publish to all the three big mobile platforms, to Windows Phone, Android, and iOS. I found that was not free. I found it was not even cheap when I went and said, okay, hey, I'm one guy that wants to develop some nice things for the community.
Yep.
There's a price for entry, and so what we're talking about tonight, Visual Studio, frankly, is the price for entry. So I'll apologize in advance, but when you see the authoring experience, I think you're at least going to appreciate that there's some encouraging news for IT pros. So if you work in a corporation or a consulting company where you're going to be working with deploying Azure V2 components, you're going to have one heck of a case to go to your boss and say, hey, you need to buy me a copy of Visual Studio, and here's why. I think nobody will complain after they see it. I think it's just not possible to complain too much.
Agreed. One thing I would say, and you mentioned it, if there is anyone out there listening or watching to this podcast who does feel strongly about it, jump on user voice, raise it as something that you feel that the community needs, and send us an email or send us a tweet. Let us know the link, and we'll make sure that we give it some airtime, and we'll get as many people voting that up as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be the first one to plus one that.
Yep, likewise.
And Microsoft does what they can. I do appreciate the fact that Microsoft has a very vibrant community compared to a lot of other competing technologies out there. And I can remember doing some integration with multiple automation systems in one project. I was actually integrating System Center Orchestrator with 3 other automation components from 2 vendors, and I found that their communities around their product were actually non-existent. I wanted to tap an undocumented API, and the way we got the answer was calling support. It's crazy, where with Microsoft, you're always going to find somebody who's taken some lumps somewhere before you. All right, so anyway, the big change in my book are these JSON templates, which gives us a declarative deployment model, gives us consistency between Microsoft Azure and the Azure stack. So we have now a single deployment methodology for private and public. So cats and dogs living together, hybrid cloud as it should be, as we imagined it might have been by the naming of Windows Azure and Windows Azure Pack. So let's go to Visual Studio, okay? So just to set the stage for you here, I have Visual Studio 2013. This works equally well with Visual Studio 2015 the preview release. I think we're still in RC, so 2015 release candidate Visual Studio. I have Azure SDK 2.6 for .NET loaded. So don't worry about writing all these things down. We're going to give you all of these steps very clearly in the show notes. So Microsoft Azure SDK for .NET 2.6. You go to the download page, you download it, you install it, click next, done. I launch Visual Studio. And so here's where it begins. So I'm going to show you I'm going to show you two things. So I'm going to digress for just a moment to show you that Powershell Tools add-in I mentioned from Adam Driscoll.
Yep.
So if you're somebody who knows Adam Driscoll, give him a shout out from us. Love this thing. So I've loaded Adam's Powershell Tools add-in, which I downloaded from the MSDN gallery, from the Visual Studio gallery. So I'll go to my Visual Studio. I'm going to go to New Project, just like this. And when I select that new project, it's going to give me some options. I will find, if I scroll down far enough, the PowerShell option. So you have a couple of options here. You have PowerShell module if we were going to write our own PowerShell module. And then we have PowerShell script. When you do that, it's going to open a PowerShell friendly window, complete with IntelliSense, etc. This is great stuff. So there you see it, right? It feels like a proper PowerShell editor in Visual Studio. So I'm not sending you up a creek without a paddle here. This is a proper editor. Right. Period. Yep. I can run my script. The output is going to appear in the bottom, much like the PowerShell ISE. So suffice it to say, I like it. I use it. I'm comfortable with it. I can write my Azure Automation runbooks there as well, incidentally. So mission accomplished. So now I want to take you to New Project once again, and I want to show you, I'm going to shift gears, and I want to show you how we now launch one of those other projects, which will be our Azure Resource Manager option. So you'll see that it's going to show me here my recent stuff. So Visual Studio kind of keeps track of what you use frequently. I want to show you kind of your shortcut menu there. So you're going to notice under Visual C#, there's an Azure Resource Group option. So you'll go to Visual C#, you will go to Cloud. So again, File, New Project, Visual C#, Cloud, and there's Azure Resource Group. This is what we're working with, and I'm going to launch that. I'm not going to rename anything, and I'm going to kind of show you what this does. There are multiple ways you can deploy these templates, and this is going to be kind of a breakneck speed how-to here, but I want to give you all the tools you need to not feel your way around as I did some weeks or months ago when this was first sort of made available. So it's creating my project. I can go out here. I'll typically want to, under View, set up Server Explorer, which allows me to connect to my what am I trying to say? To my Azure subscription.
Yep.
And and you'll be prompted to get into your Azure subscription. So rather than building one from scratch, what I'm going to do is open an existing sample for you here. So I've got an existing project, and I want to just show you. I want to actually open the solution here, and I want to show you what it looks like exactly, and how we work with this. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute here, Dan.
Sure.
So I can I want to resize my screen here, but
you do what you got to do.
Okay, going back in now.
Alrighty.
Sorry, I had a funky screen res thing here that's giving me problems seeing my own screen. So what I have open here. So if your screen doesn't look like mine, I'm going to tell you what I have open. So I've opened an Azure Resource Group project. So remember that Azure Resource Group is the boundary now for grouping resources, tagging them, tracking them, etc. Right? So I have an Azure Resource Group project. I've pasted in a sample or I've put it in here, but what you're going to have are you're going to have an Azure deploy.json file. Mine has been renamed by intention by me, and you're going to have a parameters file. So you've got these two files. Now you're going to notice when I click on the parameters file that my Explorer, my nav window on the left goes away. When I click back to the Azure Resource Manager template, that I get something else here. So I want you to look at this, because this is why Visual Studio is going to be your ticket to the best authoring experience. You're going to have a parameters node and a variable node, and those are just what you think they are. A variable is where I can define a variable. Here feels like a variable in Orchestrator a little bit, because I can assign that variable a static value, or I can actually assign it a dynamic value. Parameters, just what you'd imagine they are. Those are parameters where we're going to prompt a user for input. Incidentally, you can define default values for parameters. So if you want to give a user the ability to just hit the go button, if they're okay with your options, you can do that. The resources. So you'll start with an empty resource component, and when you hit add new resource, here's what pops up. You get the add resource option, which will show you things like availability set, nested deployment. You remember I mentioned you can call one ARM, Azure Resource Manager, or ARM template from another. There's the PowerShell DSE extension. You'll see network interfaces are now independent first-class objects that can be associated with a virtual machine, with a load balancer. If I scroll down here, you're going to see some of the PaaS components. You'll see storage accounts. You should be familiar with the storage account if you're working with Azure IaaS. You'll see virtual network. So I can define a VNet and I can define subnets, and that's actually what I have here. Is I actually have a multi-subnet virtual network template. It's the 3-subnet template. Sorry, there's a 2-subnet template. You'll find out on the examples that I'm talking about. I turned it into a 3-subnet template and did some playing. But there's Windows Virtual Machine. Now look at this. When I click Windows Virtual Machine, it says, hey, what storage account would you like to use? And what subnet would you like to put it on? So the wizard is going to auto select some things for me. It's going to create the virtual machine. It's going to create the network adapter. It's going to put that network adapter in the appropriate VNet and subnet. So it's already speeding things along. But you see the visual authoring experience here, right? Mm-hmm. So just to juxtapose, there's Visual Studio. There's Notepad++.
Yep.
Free is okay. In this case, not free is a whole lot better. This visualization is not complete, by the way. So there's some things you're not going to see in here, like you don't see load balancer in here. So there are some other things that will come to this. When we talked with Corey Sanders from the Azure team at Ignite, we asked him, is Microsoft going to invest? And you should go watch that session with Corey, because it was only 8 or 9 minutes long. It was really short, but we hit him with the burning questions. And so he said, of course, Microsoft's going to continue to invest in this visualization here, this visual authoring experience. I got to say, it's nice. And I was much happier working with these templates here than I was anywhere else. And if you have any problems in your template, let me just break something here. So when I have a problem, you get the little squiggly line. So I just took away a comma, for example, and you'll notice here when I mouse over the squiggly line, it says, "Hey, dummy, you're missing a comma."
Yep.
Great stuff. So just like with PowerShell, where we get with the IDE, where we get, or with the with PowerShell visual editors, we get that same sort of prompting when we've made a mistake. Visual Studio, if you're not familiar, does the same thing for you. So again, I don't care if you're an IT pro. I don't write a lot of code. I write a very, very little bit of C#. I write a little bit more VB.NET, but mostly I write PowerShell, just like any other IT pro out there. So
yep.
I hope at least this initial tour kind of gives you the sense that you can navigate this on your own safely. Now, I want to talk to you about deployment options. Okay, so there are multiple ways you can deploy this. And this is interesting. So the easiest way, or well, I'm not even going to call this the easy way. One way you can do this is I can actually over here in Solution Explorer. So just to be clear, I've gone to the View menu and I've put Server Explorer here so I could attach to my Azure sub. And I've also put Solution Explorer over here. So Solution Explorer just shows me my ARM template, it shows me my parameters file, and it shows me a PowerShell deployment script. So you can actually deploy this with PowerShell. Microsoft's written the script for you. You basically just go to a command prompt and you switch over to that directory and you run this thing.
Yep.
So I'm going to do it this way. I like to go to right-click my template, and you right-click here and you select Deploy. It's going to ask me for a new deployment. I will pick my trial subscription here. I'll say do a new resource group. Remember, that's a logical boundary. So why am I doing a new resource group? Because this is going to be deployed separate of anything else I have. What I love about this is if you deploy 8 VMs and a load balancer and a SQL database and an Azure website, if you deploy a mixture of IaaS and PaaS components and you deployed that for some testing or some dev and you're done with it, I can actually go to the preview portal. I can delete that resource group, and that's my boundary for all those resources. It very reliably wipes everything out.
Yep.
It flattens it. It's fantastic, as my buddy Anders would say. Mm-hmm. And so I'll pick my region. I'll hit go. This is going to create the container for me, the resource group. Now it's going to say, okay, here's the template we're using. If you want to look at your parameters, you'll notice that a lot of my stuff is already filled in here. That's because I defined some default values, because when I'm playing with things over and over, I don't like to have to fill in the same boxes over and over again. But the great news is you can fill those values in ahead of time. So if you're deploying multiple times, all good.
And how do you define that?
Well, so I have a parameters file here. You can also, when you're building your template, I can let me see if I have some default values. Yeah, so here you go. So I'm going to just zoom in here. Mm-hmm. So I'm in my ARM template, and what you're going to notice is in several places you see where I've defined default value.
Yep.
It's because I want a default value there every time, yep. And it doesn't mean that that you have to accept that. What it means is, if you're okay with it, that's what I'm going to use.
Sure.
So that's kind of a nice to have little element there. So the other place you can deploy this I mentioned was PowerShell. If I think about the other place you could deploy, you can go to the full portal.
Yep.
And I can go out here and browse and do a template-based deployment. So and I actually don't even, the way, the even more fun way to deploy. Deploy.azure.com. So you can basically walk through the wizard and through the full portal.
Yep.
Or through the preview portal rather, and you can deploy. So how you want to do it is up to you, but you've got a number of options there that will make this tenable for you. So, and the actually, let me just show you the template deployment right quick, so you know where to find that. I think I actually stopped sharing before I showed you.
You did.
Sorry about that. So go down to. Tell me when you see my screen there.
Yep, we got it.
So go to developer services, and then just type template in the filter box, and you'll get template deployment. So now you can create and you can paste your template in there. So when I edit the template, I can paste it right there. I can paste
parameters.
Yeah. So actually you'll just paste everything in here. Your parameters will be there.
Oh, okay, yeah, good point.
Let me just take a for example here. So let me take this template and I'll paste something in there just to kind of show you. So even in the UI here, it's going to be largely done for you. I'll save that step, and then you'll notice my parameters now doesn't have the little lock on it, and bam, there I get the parameters.
Yep.
So deploy from directly within Visual Studio while you're testing. You can deploy from PowerShell if you're handing this off to other people. I'll be real honest with you, PowerShell right now is my least favorite way to deploy these because I tend to be working and exploring today.
Yep.
And then, from there, the full portal is another nice option. So that is kind of your breakneck tour, if you will. So I didn't want to keep you too long today. We like to keep these around an hour, but now you have some insight. So what we'll include for you in the show notes will be, first those tools you need. Where's that PowerShell Tools add-in for Visual Studio? Where do you get Azure SDK 2.6 for .NET? The template library, and then we're going to point you to 2 to 4 sessions from Build or Ignite that will walk you through some of these new features. It's fantastic stuff, though, I got to say. So
yeah, it is.
Very excited to see what develops in the next few months. So IT pros, I hope you will not feel cheated that we've gone to Visual Studio, but this is something we talked about a few months ago. Visual Studio is increasingly becoming, in the world of DevOps, this is becoming the common tool set for IT pros and and IT ops and the development teams. So it's best that just like we all sometime 2 or 3 or 4 years ago had to get comfortable with cloud. Now is the time to start getting comfortable crossing that line a little bit and stretching your skills. So, we've heard, if you don't learn PowerShell, you're going to be out of a job. I heard the other day, it's too late. Now it's time you've missed the PowerShell bus. Now it's time for PowerShell DSE. So I think that was all done kind of tongue-in-cheek out there on Channel 9. I think the fact of the matter is it's not too late to learn PowerShell. You can do that anytime you wish. But this is another opportunity to get ahead of the game. So, this stuff is all in preview right now, and so it's going to get mainstream at some point down the road.
Well, if this is the sign of things to come, I think we should all be really excited. And yes, Visual Studio is the tool of choice, and it makes sense for everyone to sort of embrace that and use that as that central development platform. And again, we would encourage you, and we'll include a link to the user voice site where if you want to go and submit something around this particular topic, we would encourage you to do that. And as I said, send a tweet to @Inside Podcast. It's legacy stuff. It's hanging around. Send us a tweet to @Inside Podcast, and we will make sure that we mention it and provide links and do what we can to get that voted up. But I think we should all be genuinely excited about what's coming in IaaS V2 and what we can expect to see out of Azure Stack. As Microsoft start making more announcements around that particular product, I think we can all start to appreciate the fact that Microsoft are making the management of a hybrid cloud just that much easier.
I can't wait until the first show we record after Azure Stack is released in preview, and we can take one of our ARM templates for Azure and we can immediately try to deploy an Azure Stack.
Yep. Yeah. No. In fact, you know what? I think we should do that. I think we should schedule something in for the day that Azure Stack comes out, maybe 24 hours to give us an opportunity to install it. But I'm with you. Let's try and break it, see what happens.
There you go.
Good stuff. Any final words from you? I mean, what would you be encouraging people right now to do to go out and try and skill up on this?
So,
is JSON the best place to start? Having an understanding of the structure and format for JSON, Or is
So
it?
you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a JSON tutorial out there for you that I think that's fairly succinct. That I think will give you enough. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yep.
You don't really have to be a JSON expert, and many of us working with Windows Azure Pack, are still not JSON experts, but we've gotten to the point that we can work with it. Over there, Microsoft actually made an authoring tool to obfuscate the JSON, and so in this case, Visual Studio is kind of that tool, lessening our need to write JSON from scratch or piece together existing templates. But that visualization, that visual authoring experience is not yet complete. We can see from Visual Studio with the 2.6 SDK, so you're gonna be exposed to it. So yeah, go watch a short JSON tutorial, but I think most importantly, go watch a couple of these intro to Azure IaaS next gen sessions from Build or Ignite we share with you.
Yep.
And you're all good.
Indeed. All right. Well, we now have 2 minutes and 10 seconds before this song finishes and we finish. That's how it goes now, folks. So tell the good people how they can find you, Pete, where they can follow you.
So you can find me tweeting on Twitter at PZERGER, and most of my blogging these days at InsideTheMicrosoftCloud.com.
There we go. You can follow me online on Twitter at Dan Kreger, DANKREGOR. Make sure you jump on over to IPN.tv for all the latest episodes, show notes, videos. Likewise, jump on over to youtube.com/user/Inside Podcast Network if you prefer to go that way. Certainly subscribe to the network and get all the latest videos when they are released. You can always find the audio versions of these podcasts within your podcast directory of choice. They should be there. If you are feeling generous and you feel that you get something out of this, then feel free to give something back. Jump on over to patreon.com/IPN and donate a little bit of money to go to running the podcast network. Your donations are greatly appreciated. Have I left anything out, Mr. Zerger?
I think that was all very well said and fairly complete.
Thank you. Still got 50 seconds. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? No, that's all right.
So we'll be back next week for another episode of Inside Systems Center.
That we will. Don't forget, if you do have a topic that you want us to discuss, send us a tweet at Inside Podcast. You can always send questions in regards to this podcast to using the hashtag InsideMSCloud. You know what? I think for now, this has been Inside the Microsoft Cloud episode 5. Pete, thank you again.
My pleasure.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Cheers.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan.